All right, welcome everyone. It's just about 2 o'clock. This is Megan from Aperture Education. We are in our last of this 3-part series about trauma-informed practices. We're so excited to have you today. Just as a quick note, we are having some severe weather here in Charlotte, and there is a slight possibility that there could be an interruption to the webinar. If that happens, we will let you know, and we will try to get out a full recording to you as soon as possible. But just so that you are aware, that may be a possibility. We're keeping our fingers crossed that it won't, but we want everyone to be prepared. So before we begin, I want you to check your screen, and you should notice that we have our slides up. You'll see Aperture Education at the top, and then Welcome Trauma-Informed Practices mini-series. It should be in the middle of your screen, a little bit larger. If for some reason it's not, and it's in a smaller box at the top of your screen, all you have to do is double click on that small box, and it should open it up into a larger screen for you. If you ever have any technical questions, if for some reason you can't hear anything or you can't see the slides, there is a little button that says raise your hand. If you will raise your hand, we will go ahead and reach out to you via a private chat so that we can take care of that for you. There are also a few other options at the bottom of your screen. There is a chat function. So if you want to go ahead and type in your name, your school district, and where you're from in that chat function and test it out, just so we can see where everybody is joining us from today, that would be awesome. And then you'll also see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A button is a place for you to ask any questions for our panelists. We will be monitoring that Q&A section. So at the end of the webinar, we will be looking at those questions and making sure that we have a little bit of time to have Brian and Lisa Ann answer those questions for you. Just a quick reminder, we should be sending out a recording either this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. You'll receive the recordings from all 3 webinars. You'll also receive all of the resources that we shared with you throughout the 3 presentations, and you will also receive a link that you can use to fill out to get certificates of attendance for all 3 of these webinars. Again, that email will be coming out from me either later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. So if for whatever reason you haven't received it by, I would say, tomorrow afternoon, feel free to reach out and we will take care of that for you. So with that, I think those are all of our quick announcements, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Brian and Lisa Ann.
Great, thank you very much, Megan. And as I'm watching the attendees, numbers jump up. Just to kind of restate what you had said early in your introduction, was that there are some severe weather conditions happening out there, and if there's any interruption, we will make sure to re-record and send out a full uninterrupted version of the webinar. Thanks. Lisa Ann.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to say thank you again for joining us. I'm going to take a brief moment before we go ahead and Brian tells you a little bit about himself in case you did not get to meet him in webinars 1 and 2. But I have to say, when we're thinking about systems and change, that I have been very lucky to have experienced in my 13 years lots of different examples of that. And in some cases, I've had the chance to be dropped into a program where there were already amazing things going on and positive results and successful systems and supporting students with many different needs. And in the spirit of resiliency, I have to say, I've also been exposed to programs in which I had to face challenges and I had to grow and I had to change. And some of that comes with that new environment, and some of that came from myself not having the skills that I needed in that new environment. So really embracing that change myself and becoming able to support my students and also the others in my school. And so I'm excited to look at this, thinking about, what change means and what it takes to really bring about a systems level change. and that it's not the destination is our goal, but it's that continual journey. And I know Brian has a lot to share when it comes to those journeys. Thanks, Brian.
Well, thanks, Lisa. And yeah, and too, I just want to say, speaking of change and growth, having partnered with Aperture Ed and specifically working with you on this, it's been a pleasure. I'm worked my own growth edge here and trying to take all that we do, not just me, but you and all the people on this call, what we do every day, and try to offer some guidance. In addition to my time in the classroom and as a principal and on steering committees for trauma, the joy that I find in my current role is helping people move the needle forward. And it takes work. And I kind of just wanted to open up with that, right? We've sort of danced along the tips of multiple large icebergs here. And I think this particular thread that we're going to start here today is probably the largest, because we're talking about at a systems level. And to follow in exactly what you said, it's going to take some humor and it's going to take some heart from all of us to do this together. And so many of us are kind of called to this profession, really what we like to call a vocation, right? Vos, from the Latin calling. I think all of us are here, and we're going to need to be able to laugh and remember the why behind what we do in order to kind of make the jumps that we need to. As you mentioned, this is the third in a series of webinars. And so I wanted to kind of just remind us, or kind of channel some of the themes that we talked about. The first being that awareness building and sort of academic understanding of what's out there in their literature, what's sort of new in our research, what do we understand about ourselves, and what could be going on with and among ourselves and the children, our staffs, and in our communities. So we really took a look at what is. And then in the second webinar, we started to talk about how do we sort of maintain relationships, right? Person to person, these connections, and specifically some strategies within the trauma-informed approach, which really highlights the safety, the transparency, the peer support, the collaboration and mutuality, and of course, understanding that we all have our sort of cultural, historical, and gendered lenses at the world. So we see the world through the lens that the world sees us, and we gave some suggestions about how to approach your work and partnerships with that lens. And how do we then move it into practice with those rituals and those routines to really manifest this new way forward together. So it's in that spirit we arc in to this term, trauma-informed care. Now, in a certain way, you see those sort of highlighted words, right? Realizing the impact of trauma on individuals, families, groups, organization, and understanding the path to recovery. The ability to recognize signs and symptoms of trauma, which we sort of made more complicated in that example about understanding a child's externalized behaviors and some of the complexities relative to, is this trauma manifestation or something like ADHD, right? We see a lot of co-occurrence of those. So ability to recognize it, and then integrating trauma knowledge into our policies, programs, and practices. So hopefully that was a real boots on the ground idea of what you could be doing within your classroom context. And then of course, and always seeks to avoid re-traumatization. So not stepping in the waters that we want to avoid. Now, that's great. This is a theory, it's a way forward. And I felt like this quote sort of really encapsulated the work I get to do with the hundreds of schools and the wonderful people about this inquiry lens, about what's happening, because there is no checkbox for trauma-informed care. And I know it's a buzzword that's out because it's important. And the idea here is where I was at a summit on Friday, and one of the presenters, Sandra Blum, sort of opened with a joke about, you know, we want to be, quote, we, whoever that organization or district is, says, we want to be trauma informed. We have an hour and a half PD. Can you do it, right? And that's unrealistic. It's about our evolution as a group together and how this awareness and this value, right? How do we make decisions around this values-oriented approach to policies, practice, and programs so that we can depathologize problematic behaviors, right? It's not what are they doing? We don't do anything to them or for them. We do things with them and with each other to get us going in the right direction. What I particularly appreciate about the people I continue to learn from is that there's a big delta between theory and practice right now for me, especially in this arena, because what's being called for is a new paradigm, a new way in which we're looking at things. And at a certain point, we just have to roll up our sleeves and do the work. And I think that's what Lisa Ann was sort of eloquently framing for us, is that it's not easy work either. And sometimes we can't think our way. And one of my problems, or one of my challenges in trying to prepare a webinar about information that's done, or what I like to say, belly to belly. Ashanti Branch is a guy I've worked with out here at Ever Forward Club. Great work, check it out. But ultimately, things that are done belly to belly, but in the form of a webinar, we're really sort of having this cognitive approach to it. It's good to know it, but then now what do we do? Because it's going to be happening in the buildings and with the people. And easier said than done, because we are working within a very complex system. We are trying to meet the needs of a lot of different people, and we exist in alphabet soup, right? So this feels like, in a certain way, another thing, but it really could be conceptualized as a through line through all things, right? This sort of looping effect around which we can begin to make some informed decisions. And I know Lisa Ann was gonna kind of walk us through some of those complexities.
Thanks, Brian. I have to say that it's been a journey for myself, just understanding where SEL has really fit in with this. It seemed for such a long time that there were silos, that it was SEL, or it was PBIS and behavior, or it was trauma-informed practice. And so as we've been learning about the impacts of SEL on specific areas, and then with MTSS coming in and really bringing that umbrella, I have to say Region 10 had a great visual for that MTSS, and it's like that umbrella that everything falls on underneath and kind of filters down. And that really, we're not only looking at supporting, students who have more needs or have maybe more ACEs and they've had more trauma in these specific groups, but we're looking at what we provide for students to filter down into that classroom and where they're at for the majority of the day, and that every other opportunity after that is an additional chance for them to grow and to build those skills. And one thing that's been great about the DESA, and I continue to have, our clients tell us how they're using it and inform us about areas that we might not even have thought of, is that, it is really able to provide that whole child view. So with the DESA in that Tier 1, it's identifying the strengths of students so educators can use them in building that in their relationships with that child, and really in the classroom, providing that safe zone of learning expectations, because educators have an idea of what can children already do and what's, that zone of proximal development, and what are they not able to really do yet. So that might take a little bit more trust and development to kind of take that leap in learning. But that also flows right into when you're thinking about students dealing with trauma, when they're faced with fight and flight, and that reaction, we're able to provide opportunities and skills in front of them that are in their repertoire that are usable in those moments. Additionally, it also helps to guide whole class instruction and focusing on skills and competencies that will impact the students that have the most need in their SEL skills. And so it gives educators some kind of solid starting points, because there's a lot to do. There's a lot to approach when it comes to SEL skills. And so thinking of that from a trauma lens, we want to be able to focus on some things that the educator not only, yes, knows, but really has internalized and can understand in those moment-to-moment interactions with those students. You know, the DESA has provided those support staff information for students who are tier 2 or tier 3. It's provided that positive common language so that they can, you know, describe where those children are at. And like you said, we're not looking at just labeling and recognizing a child by what the behaviors are and how they act. We're really thinking about who are these children as a whole person, and where are they right now, and how can we really just build from there. And really it's helped those support staff and teachers in the classroom have clear expectations, and everyone's on the same page about what that child has and what for their skills and what they're working on. So there's not those inconsistencies from environment to environment. And then finally, you know, looking at those individual skills, even for those tier 3 students. But the DESA is very unique, and it's built on focusing on building on resiliency and protective factors. So giving educators, you know, a well-rounded skill set so they can dig in and look at what kinds of positive coping skills and behaviors they can foster in those daily routines and explicit teaching, and how that can support overall. And you know, that can come in the way of bringing that in during the welcome routines, during circle time. That can be looked at pulling those skills in when you're establishing those group behavioral expectations and operating norms. There's so many different ways that those can be explicitly taught and modeled and brought in. And so throughout all those tiers, that is where we've really found that overlap, and I'm sure it will continue to grow. And everyone will still come and tell us things that we didn't even know ourselves sometimes about the DESA and the work that's happening. But that is that evolution and change. And so we are enjoying this journey as well with everybody. And back to you there, Brian.
All right.
Can I interrupt just for a quick minute? Sorry, this is Megan.
Yeah,
we did have someone ask if you could explain what MTSS, the DESA, and SEL mean for someone who might not understand.
Yeah, so SEL are social emotional learning. They are the skills by which children and adults manage their emotions, set goals for themselves, maintain relationships, and also have an awareness about themselves and their own actions. And then MTSS are multi-tiered systems of support. And so that is the umbrella that is really housing all of the tiered systems of support, both for academics and then social, emotional, and or behavioral. And we've focused more on that social emotional side. Just developmentally, those skills are prerequisite skills prior to entering school. And also when we talk about behavior, you know, social emotional skills are behavior, it's positive behaviors, and not necessarily looking at the behavior issues and kind of that route. And then the DESA is the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. And I apologize because I did not clarify that at the beginning. We had touched on it in the previous webinar, but it is a universal screener and in-depth assessment that helps educators get the information about where their student skills are and what strengths they have. And then it also helps measure the impact of those different components going on. So whether it's at tier 1 and looking at making sure that that continues to support all learners, or whether it's doing that progress monitoring at tier 2 and tier 3 so that services can be adjusted for students and or they can be exited from services as they grow and don't require that support. So thanks for that question.
That's great. Yes. Again, alphabet soup, right? Context and making sure we're all kind of speaking the same language. And just as an aside, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, and I don't know if I mentioned to this particular audience, our original relationship was a function of me working with schools and recommending the DESA Mini, which is a screener, a tool that you guys use, which was co-developed by Dr. Valerie Shapiro of UC Berkeley, with whom our company did research. And I say that because it'll actually take me to this next step, is it's a practical tool for teachers. It was me just going, look, this works. You're in this framework of MTSS where we're needing to look at our student population and use multiple sources of information to best serve the student's needs, right? And so for me, I just have to say the DESA Mini was a simple 1 to 2 minute screener that teachers could use. So that was a little history about how we even linked up, because it was about what works in the field. And that's one of those things that starts to be the departure here of theory and practice. When we were looking at that sort of multi-tiered system, and that pyramid actually, just again to be clear, is about our sort of typical student populations, the tier 1 students being about 80% of the students who are within classrooms, tier 2 needing some targeted interventions, about 10 to 15%, and then tier 3, which are support services and more distinct. So to even come back to this idea of being trauma informed, the working term I have for this, because our program is called We Are Resilient, is this idea of resilient discipline. Even at the most fundamental levels, when I look at schools or work with schools together, we like to move forward, I use the term resilient discipline. And the real guiding question here is, how does it occur to the child, this idea of discipline, right? Teachers find themselves needing to steward the emotions of a lot of young kiddos in their classroom. And there are those moments where a child's needs can't be met in your classroom at the time. And hopefully we have all the best practices in play where we say, hey, I'm sorry that you can't get yourself right here. I want you to learn more about this. And the framework here on the discipline, as we're moving to that more humanistic approach, not just compliance, is the 3 factors of resilience theory through Bonnie Bernard's work. Is the idea is there a caring adult at the next step? Who are they going to go see? 2, is there high expectations message embedded in the practice or experience that they can and will find a way forward? And then the 3rd part is, are they a meaningful participant in this process of learning and self-discipline? And the term, for instance, with the ... is, sort of start the stories, right? I actually work with schools when I say, bring me the discipline form. What does that look like? What does that feel like? How is it getting messaged? Where is the child going? With whom are they speaking? Typically, it's the wonderful central nervous system of all schools, your office manager, right? Who are those people that know all the kids' names and how they're spelled and where the parents are at any given moment, right? We have this wonderful, caring community that needs to rally around this young kiddo. But what does that feel like for the kid? Is there shame and blame? Or is there a learning opportunity? Or they're doing a self-reflection sheet and then getting reintegrated back into the classroom? Is that our goal? What is happening moment to moment for this child with these 3 dimensions, and are they present? You run into these functional practical realities where there's no place to send the kiddo, or you have a restorative room sometimes. And sometimes that becomes their safe place, but the real goal is to get everyone in the classroom. So really, what is happening at all phases of the experience for the child? And that's one of those sort of concrete examples. Is there a buddy classroom? All those things to be determined and made true based on where you are. And I say that because every site, every classroom is a microcosm of the school climate as a whole, and the school climate is usually a function of the complexities of a district. This was, an anonymous district. It's a for instance. But the awareness that in the trauma-informed care approach, we really start to map on all the work that we do for our own ACEs and healing and awareness to stop being in a reactive pattern. Our organizations and schools and communities have those same parallel processes happening. And we have to start with that acknowledgement. Again, I get into a lot of conversations, and I won't use any specific names here, but I was talking to a wonderful care provider in a smallish district. This is the org chart you see here is only the district construction of approximately 8,500 student school district with 3 high schools, alternative high school, 3 middle schools, and 8 elementary schools. I was talking with a teacher, no, actually a clinician, and they are shrinking back because the term budget cuts is happening. They're going to LCAP meetings. Out here is local control accountability plan, right? How does that work for us as professionals? And how are we how are we in reactive mode? What kind of trauma is there? There's been budget cuts for the last 6 years in a row in certain districts that we've worked with. And how does that affect everyone? And even to move this idea of cognitive threshold, Costa goes on, Rebecca D. Costa, she wrote the Watchman's Rattle, right? She's a sociobiologist. She goes on to move it and say, when there's this delta between what we know to be right and what is actually happening, then we start to pass problems on into different places to keep it moving. We're not actually healing the root cause of the problem. We're just, moving things around ceremonially. And I don't know if you've been in school, sometimes those dimensions take hold, the idea of siloing. And so if we're looking holistically and really understanding how trauma exists in us as professionals, in our kiddos, and even within our systems, there are so many dimensions that are in support of the child. And we as a company always keep the child in the center of our decision-making tree, because that's why we're here, and try to arc back into what's good for the child, what's good for the humans doing the work, right? Because this is people-centric. No program can replace anyone else. There are people who are out there doing the work. And if you want to move the idea of wellness forward and healing, something as simple as, let's say, mindfulness or breathing. There's so much science, there's so much clarity about the importance of taking a breath, but what are your rituals and practices in all phases of support and doing that support it and make it an actuality? Do you start your meetings together at a staff level with breathing and centering together as a group, right? And this is a sort of workshop sort of slide where we actually go through and map things out and start to give you a path. And I was trying to think about our audience and so many different humans represented here in different parts of the country with different stories. How can you start to orient to this big new way forward? And we do that simply through an inquiry-based self-evaluation. And I joke with Lisa Ann and my colleagues, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I've seen enough context, a variety of places and people that I've developed some skills around honing in on questions. What question could be valuable? And sort of 3 phases this is a nice distillation of the process. And I think can be very valuable if you guys are with that, curiosity about what's wrong. And that's going to start with some honesty. What is intake and tier support? What is happening? And an inventory of people, programs, and school climate. What is the narrative? Because I mentioned that systems can carry trauma, oral traditions, sometimes certain members of the community find themselves being the keeper of tradition or telling people what is or so. And so there is even a radical honesty about, wow, is our culture right here? How are we moving towards hope and healing and humor and heart? Or are we sort of all kind of just telling ourselves the same old story? How are we going to write a new story? So what is? And sometimes that's very, sometimes that just tells us a lot. Whoa, locating ourselves. And then from there, it says what could be, right? Finding coherence of vision and mission. Sometimes we realize, oh, we've actually had sort of unspoken different goals here in place. Someone could be the project-based learning initiative. All these passions exist in all these people. And so there's no wonder why there feels like fracture, because everyone's sort of unknowingly moving towards new or their own goals. And so I often talk about where does these visions and values, trauma-informed care, sit within either a school board policy or a district practice, or the acronym we use ESLERS, right? Student learning expectations at your site. And then once that process has happened, what's the lowest hanging fruit? Where is an incremental change opportunity together? And then finally, to move the work out and forward, because it's so dynamic and because we need to keep looking at ourselves in this new paradigm, what are your short-term realistic goals? What's something you can mark and measure and move towards? And also celebrate the good, right? Leverage the stories of hope, because those are going to be the things that keep you going. We like to say, there's so much burnout in our profession, but we want to source the flame of the passion that brought you to the work to prevent that burnout. And so how are you in practice with your rituals, with your routines, doing that together as a group? And one missing dimension of everything I've said here is the word time, right? Are you operating with joy because you want to be there or not? It's consistency over time as well, and making a consistent practice of getting the right people in the room together to deal with it. And both Aperture Ed in their EdCert program and we with our We Are Resilient are really focusing on the wellness of the doers, the people who are in the field. And that quote down below, our CEO, Mary McCoy Thompson, wonderful, did behavioral health curriculum, Bright Futures, just a veteran genius. She was sort of listening to me as I was preparing for this, and she kind of distilled things down into this quote. She said, what I think you really mean to say is we need to heal. In order to heal the system, we have to heal ourselves. And that is one of those easier said than done dimensions of it. But it's also a simple but not easy answer to some of the things that we all experience kind of across the country and in all of our different lenses, is that we need to adopt this continuous improvement mentality, and that trauma-informed systems are really about healing and organization together.
And I have to relate to you there, Brian, just thinking about the conversations I've been having just even over the past couple of weeks, some with some districts who have been longtime partners with us, and just really understanding that some of the changes that have occurred there have been going on for quite a few years, whether it is budget cuts that affect support programs, or whether it is cuts that actually affect teachers, and teachers they're having to downsize how many teachers they have, and that increases classroom sizes, in addition to that just ongoing stress level of job safety. And then in addition, we all know with all the different reforms and things along the lines of academic test scores and accountability and new evaluation procedures and programs, that all of that gets piled right back onto teachers who, in addition, have consistently been reporting about the stresses in the classroom with students coming and not being able to be prepared to just be in the classroom, and the dynamics that come with that when you put academic expectations on top. So yes, some of these systems have had lots of things happening in them for quite a few years, and so it can't be expected that something that took that long to occur and bring them to this place can be undone in just, you know, one year of like some trauma-informed training. Like you said, it takes a lot more to move that ship.
Yeah, and I just hope, you know, everyone hears that's on the call here is the story of hope and to normalize what they're experiencing. And that's the offering. That kind of brings us to the end of this sort of mountain of information we're starting to look at together. And just being respectful of everyone's time. I think we're kind of right in that wheelhouse of maybe turning it over to questions. Is that true, Megan?
Yeah, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask our speakers, go ahead and type those in the Q&A box right now. We do actually have one question from Kristen. She says, how might you guide a team if they have a student that does not engage, but rather is frustrated and will not participate?
Can you read it one more time? It's about the student's frustration.
Yeah, so she says, how might you guide a team? So I'm insinuating that means a team of educators if they have a student that does not engage, but rather is frustrated and will not participate.
Lisa Ann, do you want to go for that?
Yes, and I know you'll definitely have some thoughts as I get started, but I definitely had a lot of experience with those types of students where educators would say, I cannot get them to do anything. But some of the most important things that I found that were really impactful were providing opportunities for relationship building and small asks so that you could get a little bit of momentum going, and then redirecting back to those activities or areas that are more challenging. But it does take going backwards before you can go forwards. If a child is not engaging, then there's a lack of reinforcement in that environment and or a lack of relationships. You know, children respond to different types of reinforcement. It can be, you know, they enjoy peer time. It can be they enjoy adult time. It can be they enjoy feeling successful, just completing smaller tasks and activities and content. And so it does take a little bit more time to explore what that child will respond to, and then start to introduce it so they can be successful and create, you know, those positive relationships. And that's when children will take chances for you and go beyond their comfort zone. And it kind of makes sense when you think of there's always that one teacher or a couple of teachers that you can send that child to, and they can come right back around. And we all are wondering what that magic is that teacher does. But at some point, they developed a relationship with that child and were able to connect with them on a personal level and identify something in that child that that child could see that, oh, they're not seeing me as a behavior problem. They're not challenging me and being confrontational or anything like that, that they're just giving me a moment to be who I am and to take some of that other stuff off the plate.
Thanks, Lisa. And I heard you just valuing that idea of safety. And I think withdrawal is also sometimes a symptom of a coping strategy for trauma. So withdrawing in, but you also used the word frustration. And I didn't know if that was, I'm sure there's frustration with the adults, and I'm sure there's frustration even with the child. And my only other part to this is frustration is is information. It's information about unrealistic expectations or strategies, right? So how can you adjust from that? Because frustration usually indicates some kind of gap or space between what is and what is being hoped for or expected. And just even taking more information from that frustration. And if it's frustration with the staff, that's kind of all the things that Lisa Ann talked about. What and how are we getting under them there in support?
Great, excellent. We do have one question that says, how do you get a teacher to be more positive? Such as an example would be every suggestion that is given to this teacher is declined. However, they still complain, and it may seem that they're creating more trauma for the students.
Oh, great question. It is the question. I was just in a district level meeting, and we were all, just there's that story. It's a very old story. It's a very common story, and sort of there's a grumpiness to the service sometimes of children. And unfortunately, it's in that teacher's development. It kind of brings us back to that person now and their journey and how they see themselves and in their role. I also heard, one of my principal hackles kind of gets raised up when you talk about how it's occurring to the child and re-traumatizing the child. So there's a dimension of self-growth and leadership, a toggling between that, because people have their worldviews, and that's part of what I was alluding, well, I named it, but what's our vision and mission? I often step into a room. First of all, being a consultant for teachers is sometimes really difficult because you come in and there are people with their arms crossed, what are called actively disengaged, right? Going, great, another program, a program parade. And that's the hope, is to find the mission, the students, and the joy around what it is. But if I had the perfect answer to that, I would share it widely, but sometimes there are parts of the population that are called actively disengaged, and we often recommend working with people who are open to change, and then your leaders to pull the whole momentum forward and not feed it that energy. And obviously, if it's really creating a problematic safety issue for the child in terms of their relationship, then it needs to be addressed more formally. But yeah, there's work for that person, and it's not anything for us to do for them or to them. It's to do it with them and hopefully get shoulder to shoulder and move forward together.
Excellent. Here's another question that's actually pretty well related to this question that we just answered. How do you help a teacher who already feels as if he or she is ready to leave the classroom due to a number of students who have trauma-related issues?
Lisa Ann, you want to go for it?
That is that's a very hard question. One way I found myself, or I found that other educators have success, is that they find what the strengths are from that class, in that class, each individual child, and they really take time to help everybody know each other's strengths. They take time to build that relationship where we're all growing and learning. We all have our moments, and we will change how we react to those moments and be more intentional. So learning about patience and encouragement and kindness, and learning how to be supportive and forgiving too, not to hold resentment, and to see past someone's momentary actions and continue to build that relationship and that network and community. I really have had probably the best class ever, where we had significant number of students with lots of different developmental differences and behavioral differences. But one thing that helped make that class just still a joy to be was to see the heart in those little, and kindergartners and first graders, just being able to say, you know what, this is really hard right now, but we can get past this. Or, you know, I'm starting to see that I'm getting frustrated. I'm going to go take some space. And so that that honesty and community, you know, there are going to be challenges, but when you can keep focusing on the positive, that does change your perspective. You start to see the growth, even when it's little, and you celebrate that growth. And I just remember someone commenting as we're going here about, don't don't just pay attention to the negative behaviors, but notice the little things that a child does well. Everybody wants to be celebrated. There's lots of different ways to make those short and sweet and move on. And often there's ways to involve the students so they can be the ones that find celebratory moments in the classroom. So they start opening their lens to positive as well. And the whole feeling and climate in that class changes. One area that I have found beneficial is that, students who have trauma or who have needs and SEL skills, that's not usually an area that's balanced out class to class, and that unknowingly lots of teachers get those years where they have an overwhelming amount of students who have higher needs. But we have found that with the DESTA and screening students at the end of the year, we can know where those students are with their skills and balance out classes more evenly. And so just in that themselves, they're going to have less overwhelming or unbalanced classes where they could, because of students who have trauma, could be seeing more behavioral outbursts or incidences of meltdowns and where those students are overwhelmed. So, and having more students who have positive skills to help support the class as a whole. So I would have to say that continue to build relationships with the students and have the students building with each other. Continue to reach out to any and all supports, whether that is, sometimes it's building relationships with the parents and knowing that the work that you're doing in the class, that child might be leaving, but that you've got that great relationship at home with their caregiver. And then other times it's continuing to pull on the strengths of your other educators and your grade levels and in your school, and ask for help. I used to think I was an island all to myself at times, and I realized that I don't ask for help enough. It's hard sometimes to say it's difficult and I'm struggling, and there's always someone willing to help, and you don't often know until you kind of reach out a little bit more. But that is a challenging situation. But I have to say, one of the things that I tell myself with a lot of challenging situations, however long they last, is it too shall pass. I really like to focus on small, joyful moments in the day-to-day time, and knowing that that time will change and move on.
Great, and it's a very common one. And just to add this idea that accepting what is, and sometimes that frustration and the compassion fatigue, there's kind of two mentions. How is that person creating space for themselves, not letting it in? So the self-care piece of it, so that they can move forward. The teacher attrition rates are hard because of that. So also accepting what is or isn't in their control, and focusing on what they can do.
Thank you both so much. And we have one more question that I think is really important for us to answer. And then we do have a couple of other questions, but keeping in mind people's time, we'll try to make sure that we answer those questions in our follow-up email. So the last question that I would like us to answer before we finish is, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. How can we as frontline staff effectively communicate the need for increased funding? And in your experience, what are the biggest barriers to increasing funding for trauma-informed care?
The question, right? I guess one of the first parts of it is I'm channeling Mark Brackett's answer to a similar kind of question. If we do this right and we discover all these things, the demand for services is going to increase. And at a bigger level, his response to this sort of inquiry, and I'm paraphrasing it, is essentially, if we do the wellness, if we do the social emotional learning, and we do the pro-social skills behavior, they will actually hopefully diminish over time. Now, a little more specifically about money, I'll just tell you this. My position is, and increasingly I end up in a political conversation about this, but we're fighting over breadcrumbs. So accept that. Unfortunately, there's a disconnect between what people say are our values as a community, supporting children, and then what the funding streams look like. So to move this forward, to the question is, unfortunately, with a lot of business theory entering education, part of it is documenting. And that's why I think actually the Decimini or any of these screeners start to tell the narrative in a way that decision makers sometimes need. It's like speaking their language. I don't know if that necessarily or inherently can free up money, but it makes the case for. And those are sort of board level state funding initiatives. Oregon is recently just taken on some taxes. And I know there's some districts with large influx of money on the horizon because there's political will to allocate more funds, especially in and around trauma. I think it was something like the Student Success Act that they did there. And that's part of why I do the policy education work here in California. So we sort of say, hit them high, hit them low, right? At the data level and the front lines, document the need as best you can because it's part of the language that they speak. And then as an individual, how are you creating political will and saying what is needed, and know that there's people like me trying to do it on all phases. But time, energy, and effort is what it's going to take, and ultimately a shift in our making our values and our funding streams the same, right?
And I can add on to that, Brian. I know that we definitely get that question a lot, and have already really put some time and effort into some resources to understand where this work would kind of fall under. So we do have a link on apertureed.com regarding funding and looking at which title funding can be used. Additionally, there are lots of grants out there, both state level grants and then also private business-based grants. And then additionally, we're seeing more and more that schools and districts are saying to their community, their business community, hey, we know that the students we have now will be graduates that we produce that will become your employees. And we're looking to make sure that we're sending out these individuals who are prepared to be part of the workforce and part of the community, and that impacts their businesses. And so we're seeing more of those community partnerships as well emerging, and more of a joint effort around this work that really has started in the lap of education, but then is, of course, the trickle effect is coming to really see how it affects graduation rates, how it affects college attendance rates. And even in Texas, they have the 60 by 30, looking at increasing the college completion rate in four-year degrees. And so there is that, and just there are more funding changes coming. We've seen it in Texas and Massachusetts around the preventative mental health and allocating more funds so that ratios can be where they should be for support staff in secondary and elementary. And then we're seeing it as well being funneled in Colorado, and there's definitely some other states that I am not as well versed in, but it takes a little time to dig in, but please feel free to access the resources we have. And we do try to share all the updates we get as well so that you know about it.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. We are going to have to let everyone go. Gosh, it went to almost an hour, which is just so great. I'm so glad to know that so many people are interested in this topic. So again, my name is Megan from Aperture Education. Thank you so much to Brian from Dovetail and Lisa Ann from Aperture Education for these excellent presentations. Be on the lookout for an email from me either this afternoon or tomorrow morning with all of the resources that we shared with you today and some follow-up answers to some of these excellent questions. So I hope that everyone enjoys their day. If you have any severe weather in your area, please stay safe. And I hope that you all have an excellent weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.